we're back with the 12th house.
Yes, with the 12th house. So we're doing the Sun Through the Houses series, and we have arrived
Yeah,
to the
finally.
12th. Finally. That was like 12 episodes.
Has it been? It has been, right?
Yes.
Oh, oh wow.
Yeah. We gave the sun the light of day. So much attention.
That's insane.
Yeah, it's crazy, but we're here. And I want to make a I was thinking about this a lot today. Do I want to go this route or not go this route? I'm going to go this route, so I'm gonna put a disclaimer right at the beginning of the video. If you don't have intestinal fortitude, click end. Usually people are like, stay on the video, press like and comment. I want to talk about the difficulties of the 12th house, and especially when we talk about the sun, which is the self, our soul, our consciousness, our identity being in the 12th house. I don't want to sugarcoat it.
Oh God.
Oh God. You know, when you study the words of astrology, the way it was written in the ancient times by the sages, they have rarely sugar-coated difficult things. Astrology itself is not for the faint at heart. Like if you are coming to look for confirmation of a good life, bed of roses, happy forever and ever, till death do us apart, it's best to just live day by day. And as it comes, no matter how hard it is, for some reason, because of our survival instinct, we live through it and we get through it. Like there's a reason why we don't have our expiration date, like our death. I actually think almost 100% of human beings, as much as they think they want to know when they're going to die, they don't have the capacity and the audacity to know their expiration, because their whole life will get ruined. So you want to study the science of fate, you have to have guts and courage to do it. And when we talk about the Dushthana houses, which are houses 6, 8, and 12, you have to show that intestinal fortitude, especially if you have like heavy loaded placements in these parts of the chart. It's going to say certain things that are unpleasant. And unfortunately, when we go online, we live in a world of positivity and don't F up my vibe. No one wants to hear the kinds of hardships and challenges and difficulties that these houses bring, especially when you get planets like the sun or the moon in the 12th house. Mercury brings a lot of difficulties and challenges too. Some other planets will fare better in the 12th houses. Believe it or not, Saturn does better in the 12th house. Venus does better. Jupiter can do better. But when we put the luminaries, sun and moon, as well as Mars in the 12th house, we're going to face challenges in life. It's saying something about that aspect of life. And I haven't met any human being in the years that I've lived who reflects back at their life, no matter how glorious they may seem from the outside, and they say, oh, life was so easy, cinch, like no problem. Everyone faces hardship, and the 12th house is talking about a certain kind of hardships. All the Dushthana houses, 6, 8, and 12, are telling you something about that. You know, like you look at certain yogas in your chart, once when you get well-versed, you see it, boom, it's right in front of your face. You go to your subchart, it's like, boom, they're being confirmed there too. And they're difficult yogas. They're telling you that you're going to face certain difficulties. You can't just sugarcoat it. So that's why I want to kind of approach the 12th house the way we experience 12th house as a human being, which is difficult. Is that
But
okay?
yeah.
You're
Well,
in the mood for that?
why not? Why not? Giddy up, line it up. No, I guess I was just going to ask you do you think it's just set in stone, or like knowing, because a lot of astrologers will say like certain things, if you know the information, you can also do a lot to, like we've talked in so many, the marriage is the perfect example, right? There's a lot of things, if you're aware,
Yes.
you could potentially save your marriage. It may not be the perfect marriage, but if you want it to stay together,
Yes.
knowing certain information, I'm just using the marriage example because it's just kind of a generalized example, that people might say, you see this and it's going to be a horrible marriage, but you really want it to work. Knowing the information, is it possible to make it work, to help it out, if that makes sense?
Sometimes, right? You're right. We do have to look at the whole configuration of the chart. Like there's a huge difference between the ruler of the 12th house has gone somewhere. It actually is telling us something about the things that are in the 12th house are working themselves out somewhere else. And as human beings, that could be a good thing. Like the ruler of the 12th has gone into the second house. The second house has very much to do with the material aspects of the world, whereas the 12th house is devoid of any material thing. So you have something to negotiate with now. But if the ruler of the second has gone into the 12th house, for example, and money really matters to you, you're going to have to come to accept certain situations in life. So the remedy for things is not always that we can necessarily fix it to our desire and liking. Sometimes the remedy is acceptance in some ways too. So that ruler of the second having gone to 12th, and let's say the rest of the chart is now supporting that, this person wants wealth a lot. They are going to face enormous challenges in life. So we'll have to kind of start looking at, is there a way to remedy that through the other parts of the chart? Or are we talking about a lifetime where one's karma, where one's duty, where one's path is the path of acceptance about this material aspect of life? And then a lot of times, knowledge is power because it can allow us to move towards that acceptance. And when we have that acceptance, that's when we do live to our potential. That's when we actually do have a good experience of life. That's when that detachment of the 12th house, that renunciation of the 12th house, which leads to spirituality, can bring that sense of moksha that's in the 12th house. It's perhaps trying to enlighten us about some other state of being or some higher way of being. But it requires us not to keep pushing and to keep wanting and desiring more, but maybe it's about acceptance of what this life will not permit. But because of that, another opportunity is there, such as spirituality, you know, and spirituality is not for the faint at heart. It is perhaps the most difficult thing this material, tangible human being can do, to give this up, to surrender this, to surrender all of its desires, all of its wanting, all of its longing, in the way that it bounds it to the material world and constantly brings it into this, like butting head with it and investing its life force in it as if it's everything. And then at the end of it, the person dies, takes nothing with them. With the sands of time, I don't care who they were, they will be forgotten and wiped out of history. You know, so it's kind of the 12th house, that notion of spirituality that also sits in the 12th house, that's also been sugar coated. Like it's an easy thing to have. Like if you can't have that, go become spiritual. So yeah, it's actually a very complicated house because it's a very difficult house, especially for us human beings who operate on the premise of the five senses. There is no material objects of the world in the 12th house to be sensed or experienced. That's what it's representing. It's not a place where we can meet our desires. It's not a place where we can re-energize, as we'll see when I give the significations of the 12th house and once when we start talking about it. So in general, I just wanted to make that disclaimer. It's a difficult house. And when you tune into people and they try to put a good slant on it, whether if they want to give it the slant of spirituality or what have you, that is not an easy thing in life to do either. So this is however way you want to spend this house for a human being, unless if you're a sage, you're a saint, the 12th house is going to be a difficult house. So just wanted to say that.
Great.
All right.
Looking forward to the rest of your talk.
Well, we're going to talk about the significations and then see when the sun goes in the 12th house, what does the sun feel in the 12th house? How does it negotiate itself? What is it negotiating with? What can it do? What are some of the slants and personality traits even that can come out of the 12th house when the sun is there? So quickly, I'm going to go instead of starting with the sun's signification, I'm going to start with the 12th house signification and then give the sun, because I want that to sink a little bit what the 12th house means. And then when I'm saying the sun signification, just keep that in mind. So now we're moving out of the sector of the chart. The last three houses that we talked about, which were 9, 10, and 11, they were in the public sector of the chart. We have now moved back to the sector of the chart that is about the self, which includes houses 12, 1, and 2. The 12th house is above the first house, so it's again eroding the significations of the first house. I've explained that in the earlier videos about the houses. When a house is below an anchor point, such as 1, 4, 7, and 10, it's supporting the anchor point. When it's above it, it's almost like putting pressure on it, and it's eroding the anchor point. 12th house is having this kind of an effect on the first house. So it's eroding the significations of the eastern horizon and the first house. So it's eroding the east. And this is why the 12th house is called the house of self-undoing. This is one of its significations. Because the self is the first house, the 12th house is undoing the first house significations. It's eroding it. The 12th house is also a non-physical house. There's nothing material or tangible in the 12th house. You can think of it as infinite space without any reference points. So time becomes an illusion almost, distance, things in relative terms, dualities, all these things become an abstraction in the 12th house because you don't have a reference point anymore. It's just one big black space. You can think of it like that. The 12th house signifies difficult situations. It's about isolation. Again, think about that black space and you're the only person there and there's nothing else, just you kind of floating up there. And because it's about isolation, it comes to be related to institutions that isolate you, like prisons or healthcare facilities, as well as self-imposed isolation goes into the 12th house. Foreign things are represented by the 12th house. And if you think about foreign things, they're also isolating us from what we know. And again, they're creating difficult situations because the way our mind is wired is a pattern recognition machine. So we want familiarity, we want comfort. The 12th house takes these things away from us. That's why it's related to difficult components of life. It becomes unpredictable, unfamiliar, uncomfortable. The 12th house also represents material losses. So anything that's in material starts to deteriorate in the 12th house and loses form and configuration. It also denotes financial losses, loss of physical vitality. So in a sense, the 12th house becomes about an expense. It's an expensive house in a way because it's draining all of our resources. That's what the 12th house does. It makes reality into abstractions. It makes the real into the unreal as far as the human mind and the human understanding and consciousness is concerned. That's why it is also a signification of unreality and fantasies. Hence, it's related to bed pleasures because it's talking about dreaming. It's talking about that state of being when you wake up in the morning. And in that first few minutes, you're in that liminal limbo state of sleep and wakefulness where things are not registering yet. That's a 12th house feeling. And then the 12th house comes to be about solitude. I'm telling you, there's nothing in the 12th house where your 5 senses can have a perception of it. So that solitude can be self-imposed, but it's also talking about sensory deprivation. And then the 12th house comes to be about renounce. This is where the 12th house is providing a solution to everything that I just named that is very difficult. Renunciation, which I called it acceptance, and then spirituality, which is now to understand that there is something beyond the material component and our material desires as the spirit of existence or the spirit of the world. And because of that solitude, because of that quietude, because of that isolation, because of the lack and the gap that is now in the 12th house, that you can't use anything to fill anything up with it, you're forced to connect with something deeper, higher. So it comes to be a house of spirituality. And that renunciation aspect of it is the first step to be able to tap into this part of the 12th house. And that renunciation is the acceptance of not having those material, worldly desires met. So this is what the 12th house generally signifies. Should I go to the sun significations quickly?
Yeah.
Okay. So the sun represents our soul. So it's the essence of our being. It's about consciousness, the self, identity, ego, self-concept. The sun is the center where it demands everything to orbit around it. So it's talking about a center of being. And in this way, the sun comes to represent authority, leadership, kings, anyone who has a place of power where other people and other parts of society or the world orbits around them. It represents the father, governments, how we govern other people, how we lead other people. The sun represents the light. So it's about visibility, clarity, truth, the public in a sense of being visible to other people. It represents vision. The sun also as a kind of a characteristic of the self comes to be about self-confidence, being self-assured, self-possessed, self-governed, having autonomy. So these are the general significations of the sun. And the sun also represents career. So we'll leave it at that as the primary significations of the sun. Can you think of anything so far in terms of?
Well, you said power, right? Like,
Yes.
so I'm guessing in the 12th house, you're losing all power.
You know, you can gain power in the 12th house too, because if we want to, there are different kinds of power, right? We can gain material power, for example, in this life, because we have accumulated certain kind of wealth or status. So we can flex our muscles in a very worldly way and be powerful. What if one can grasp the power of their soul and their consciousness? There are different kinds of power too, right? This house is very abstract, and it wants to tell us that if you want material power, you are the most impoverished, powerless person you'll ever meet. But if you want that power of consciousness to understand something higher, if you do what I'm telling you to do in this house, you can have that. You can have that kind of a power. But worldly power, material power, sensual power, these kinds of things are a lost game in the 12th house for sure. So when we put the sun in the 12th house, I think it's pretty clear. We're talking about dissonance, right? The sun going into the 12th house. I mean, the first thing that we got to think about, the 12th house is eroding the significations of the East, the first house. The self is the house of self-undoing. We spent our entire lifetime trying to become this self that we understand, this coherent sense of self and identity. And the 12th house is saying that I'm going to undo that. I'm going to undermine that. I'm going to drain that. I'm going to challenge that. So this is what the sun is about. It wants to assert itself. It wants to be a self. So when it comes into the 12th house, right off the bat, we see a huge dissonance between the sun and the 12th house. What is going to orbit the self? We're also accustomed to think that we got to make our families orbit around us, our work. It would be great if everyone can orbit around us because that means we're the boss and we're in charge. The 12th house is saying none of those rules apply and nothing orbits anything in the 12th house. There is no center. There is no point of reference. So how is the sun going to be the center of being, the center of anything? The sun needs a reference point. And the 12th house is denying it this kind of a reference point. And then another thing that I didn't say, I forgot to say in the significations of the sun represents health and vitality. This house basically comes to drain all of our material resources and our body, our energy and vitality is contained within our body. So the sun loses its health and vitality in the 12th house. So again, it's not a happy place for the sun. The sun wants to feel energized so then it can energize other people. It can become that life force for other people. The 12th house is denying the sun this. So it becomes a difficult placement again. Now, this 12th house is talking about hidden things, but not like the way it's like the secrecy of the 8th house. or the private things of the 4th house. Things are so obscured in the 12th house that the sun who likes to illuminate things is going to have a difficult time. It's kind of like taking the rays of the sun and just diffusing it and making it go into a black hole where it's sucking all the light in. So in this way, the sun that can illuminate the truth for us, because the sun is an illuminator. So it shows us the way, it shows us the right things. But when the sun can't shine here, this is why we get the difficult situations that come out of the 12th house, even more difficult in the 12th house. We really want to see it because the sun's inclinations, like, let me shed some light on this and illuminate it. And as soon as it does, it goes into a black hole. So it creates this feeling of I'm keep trying, but I'm keep hitting my head against the wall, and these obstacles and these difficulties don't go away. Like, what is the solution? What is the question of what is the solution becomes a conundrum for a person with sun in the 12th house. This in itself, if we think about it, if we're constantly in this state of being, talk about your energy being drained. Let's say you pay psychologists and doctors and nutritionists and trainers, you're actually draining all of your resources to be able to figure out your problem. Why can't I figure myself out? Why can't I get things right? Why can't I just move forward in life? Why don't things just happen to me? So even circumstantially, we see when a planet or a sun goes into the 12th house, it creates expenses in the 12th house because we human beings cannot initially accept it. So we fight against it. And sometimes our fighting against things is to spend all of our resources. And the 12th house wants this. The sooner it can deplete you of your resources, the sooner it can get your attention to what itself is about, the 12th house.
Is resources only financial resources, or is it mental resource, like energy?
Mental, emotional, physical, financial, social. I'm telling you, the 12th house wants to annihilate all reference points. That's why the sun has a hard time understanding what orbits it, what can orbit it around the 12th house, what its position is. Like, what is my position in the world? Why am I born? Who am I? Why am I here? What's the purpose of my life? And if they have a strong sense of purpose, why do I have so many difficulties implementing it? So it creates these kinds of situations which exhausts a person eventually. And this is a house of exhaustion in every sense of the word. It exhausts everything. It detracts your resources. You know that saying, sometimes we are our own worst enemy?
Yep.
The sun represents the self. The 12th house represents covert enemies. Like in the 6th house, they're overt enemies. Like I was saying in another video, buddy stabs you right in front of your face into your chest, point blank into your head. In the 12th house, you're being shot or stabbed in the back, right? So since the sun is here, it's talking about those subconscious patterns that we have, that we self-sabotage, for example. We sabotage the good aspects of life that could be helpful, especially if the ruler of another house has gone into the 12th house. The individual is very much doing that to that house where the ruler has gone into the 12th house. So look at what, because we're talking about the sun, look what house is Leo sitting in? The ruler of that sign's in the 12th house. So it's saying something about that house is being sabotaged by the 12th house, for example. And who's doing it? The self is, the sun is. Here, the father could also come into play too. Because a lot of times we have our parents in our subconscious mind. They're instructing us without us even knowing it. Because that's how we love. That's how we attach. That's how we run. That's how we connect. That's how we strive. Because of those ways that we were taught, and it's just such on such subconscious level that we sabotage things. Like the ruler of the 5th house has gone into the 12th house, sabotaging your romantic relationship. The ruler of the 7th in the 12th house, you're sabotaging your relationships, but because of your own subconscious mind, so you're undoing the self. So it comes to have these kinds of connections when the sun goes into the 12th house. It's very hard to sugarcoat the sun in the 12th house. It's much easier to do it with Venus, and even Saturn and Jupiter. But with the sun especially, and the moon's quite desirous too. We'll get there when we talk about the moon, but the sun especially, because the sun wants to energize, illuminate, be a leader. Like, who are you leading in the 12th house? There's no one there. It's just you and God. If anything, God's supposed to lead you. That's why it eventually attaches to spirituality. You better become devotional and follow that lead. You're not going to lead the higher being, the ultimate being. So these kinds of things come into play. And then when we want to talk about kind of characteristics that we human beings very much dislike and shun can come out of this placement. Narcissism. At the core of narcissism is a person who has a weak self-concept, and there's a lot of inadequacy in the individual who is trying to overcompensate it, which is essentially saying the person has a weak sense of ego. Because if we have a healthy sense of ego, we have a good sense of who we are, what we want, and we have a good perception of how the world sees us, and we're constantly negotiating this to get our needs and our desires met and to connect with other people. But when someone has a weak ego, they are enforcing the sense of self and they're expecting the world to see it. And then there's a lack and a gap where the connective tissues are not connecting. So the person's over-exaggerated or they become covert and manipulative in terms of getting it. So you can get these kinds of dynamics when the sun's not dignified, because you can have a sun in the 12th house that is still strong and dignified, and then you can have a sun that is in a very bad condition. So when the sun comes to be in a very bad condition, it starts to denote these kinds of characteristic traits. And then betrayal becomes a huge thing in the 12th house, because it is the way that we undo others and ourselves. We can betray ourselves. This is a house of hidden enemies. They can betray us. So these kinds of dynamics are very common in the 12th house. And the bottom line of it is, like, no matter how we look at the 12th house is striving to take away our resources and our energy and the material components of our life. And the only positive slant we can ultimately give to the 12th house is that spiritual aspect of it, which is something that transcends the self. So the 12th house is in reality transcending the more superficial significations of the sun, such as identity and ego. So you have to understand what consciousness is and what the soul is, and that is to go in that solitude, to renounce that the way that we self-affirm ourselves through the ego. It requires a kind of a renunciation in the 12th house in order for us to have a peaceful state of being, if it's possible to have it in the 12th house. So the sun comes to represent these kinds of things. And then the 12th house has to do about delusions, illusions, fantasies. It's because things are not real. They're abstract in the 12th house. So having a sense of self that's based in fantasy becomes something prominent. You know how some people say, like, I have an alter ego?
Yeah.
This is something that's signified by the 12th house, because it's a self fantasy that, now if the rest of your chart supports it, then you can have an application for it in the real world. Otherwise, it just becomes self-delusion and self-illusion, like illusions about one sense of self. So the 12th house is a difficult placement, or the sun's placement in the 12th house is a difficult one. Anything that's come into your mind so far?
No, because to be honest, like, I don't know. It's like when you gave that example of the four, like whatever, the Lord, like, it's hard to say anything, right? Because it's that type of house it is.
Mm-hmm.
The sun being there, that's kind of self-sabotaging yourself.
Yeah, and others too, depending on the rest of the chart, it's possible.
And being in, like, can you give me any kind of positive spin on this?
You're like, give me something.
Yeah, give me something.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's like, there's got to be something.
Yeah. Depending on the rest of the chart, you have the sun, your consciousness, in the 12th house. This is a house of fantasies. And let's say the rest of your chart is saying you're a writer and you like sci-fi,
Hmm.
you're going to have great imagination for such a thing. And then if you actually think about the life of a writer, for example, what do they do? What does a writer do? What does their life look like? It is one of the most boring lives you can think of, in a state of solitude, pretty much most of one's life, because the act of writing in itself is solitary. The act of figuring your plot and what you're writing is solitary. So to be that is saying again something about the nature of the 12th house. Now, if you want to be a social writer, you're going to have a bit of a problem. You have to kind of renounce the joys that other people have in their lives. So again, you can see, yes, it's giving you something positive, but the 12th house significations are at play. A writer sits behind a desk for hours on end, and their body is being depleted of all their energy, for example. So again, we see all the 12th house significations at play. The sun wants to be the center, wants to be visible, wants to be seen. If the rest of the chart supports it, this person can be a director, for example, in a movie, because it's leading the crew. It's not necessarily the actor, but it is the director, right?
Hmm.
But when we watch some of our favorite movies, we don't even know who the director is in half of the movies. There's
Yeah,
only
so they're not the center of attention then.
no, you're behind the scenes again. Do you know what I mean? You have given your entire life force and you have invested so much and more than any actor, one individual actor in the movie, and yet you don't get the recognition for it, for example. So it's detracting from your effort relative to the attention other people will receive. So yes, you can always put, this does not mean one will not be successful. This does not mean one will be screwed up in life. But this will mean, this is indicating that this individual wants a particular kind of self, especially if the rest of the chart supports it, and the 12th house is denying it. That's why I'm saying eventually it comes to the act of acceptance, renunciation, and spirituality in a sense. And that does not mean like go in a cave on top of a mountain and just meditate for the rest of your life. Sometimes that acceptance is subtle in life. It's that I have to accept that my path as a director, I wanted to be famous all my life as the most famous director. And you imagine it in your head that you're shaking hands and everyone's adoring you and loving you and you're recognized. But you have to accept that your job is behind the scenes and you renunciate that desire and that vision that was occupying your mind and your thoughts your entire life. And then perhaps that is when you become Tarantino's and I'm having a complete mental block,
So much.
Scorsese's, you
Yeah.
know?
No, but then are you just saying, so wherever the house, like you gave the house lord, for example, so uh seventh lord sitting in the 12th, is that like renunciation of marriage and relationships?
we have to look at what kind of narrative the seventh house is trying to tell us, right? Like, where's the ruler of the seventh house gone? A lot of people have great fantasies about how they think the relationship ought to be, who their partner ought to be, who they should be. This is the sun in the 12th house now, right? Who I want to be in a relationship, how I want to define myself through the relationship. Because my partner looks like that and has those kinds of financial means, let's say, that's who I am going to be. When it goes into the 12th house, the 12th house is going to show it the unreality of the reality that it had made up in its head about itself. So it's going to erode that fantastical sense of self one had built, for example. But that doesn't mean you don't have a relationship. That
Okay.
just means that you can't, the 12th house is not supporting that to become a tangible and a real and a material aspect of your life to for you to define yourself.
Okay, well then the second house was kind of also a clear cut, like you said, finances.
Finances, yeah.
That
Or
would be
family supports. Do you know what I mean? Is
but it
negating these things.
Does that mean you're going to be impoverished?
Doesn't mean you're going to be impoverished, but
Or you won't have any? Well, having no family support is one thing, but I think when somebody out there might be like, oh my God, my son is my second lord and it's sitting in my 12th house. Am I going to be poor?
it's going to affect the wealth, straining it. You could be super wealthy, but you're gonna find that
Constant expenses.
constant. So it's draining it. So I mean, another part of your chart might be showing that you make more than you lose. But if you didn't lose at the rate that you're losing, you'd be a trillionaire, whereas now you got $10 million instead
Okay,
of
so it
having
doesn't,
$1
because yeah,
billion dollars.
no, now I think a lot of people might breathe.
I want them
Oh,
to understand the gravity of the 12th
okay.
house. Because no matter how you flip this coin, when you're on the ground zero of life's experience, when it's hard, you feel it.
Yeah.
And the 12th house, 8th house, and 6th house are telling us we're really going to feel it, especially with the 8th and the 12th.
So what if you have a connection between your eighth and your 12th? What if Sun is Lord of the eighth sitting in the 12th?
The Lord of the 8th is sitting in the
Like
12th.
Sun is the Lord, like Sun is like Leo is the eighth house. So Sun has now gone to the 12th house.
Okay. The self is quite mysterious to the self. There's a lot of subconscious hidden things. The self is scared of the self. It becomes even more hidden and more difficult. It's not like the exchange that happens between the 6th and the 8th when it's between the 8th and the 12th.
Oh, that's where I was going. I thought like I mean, I'm just using, I thought 6, 8, and 12, if there's any kind of one is sitting in the other,
Yeah.
because they're all the same, it's almost like negative.
If you have a sign exchange, the planets are always to some degree protecting each other.
Mhm.
This is kind of a case of, in schoolyard, kids start to fight and they hold each other's hair. And
Yeah.
one's like, I'll let go if you let go. And neither of them pulling really hard because they know if they do, then the other guy's going to pull hard too. So they're just kind of like in this mid range. They can have that kind of a feel. It's like, if you take care of my house and my sign, I'll take care of yours. But if they're not doing a sign exchange in this way, the 8th and the 12th, in terms of coming to that conclusion of the acceptance, renunciation, spirituality, which leads to enlightenment and moksha, it's speeding up the process. But in terms of, does it make it easier? No, you just have two very difficult houses now being activated, and whatever planets that's sitting there, thankfully Sun only has one sign, but other planets have two signs, so those houses are being activated through the 12th house or the 8th house. So it brings certain difficulties, right? They are trining each other, right? So the 8, 12 are trining each other, and then 6 and 8 are sextile to each other. So it's saying that there is some kind of a support between those houses. But what I want us to, because we're not talking about the entire dynamic of the chart. We're just talking about what the symbolism of a house is and what the symbolism of a planet is. So when they go to in these houses, just as raw interpretation, these are not easy houses unless like the 6th and the 8th house, when malefics go on it, they negate the malefic nature of the house. The 12th is a little bit different with the mild malefic Sun and Mars, because Mars, for example, has to do everything about our energy, our assertiveness. Mars is the one planet that really needs a point of reference, because it's like an arrow coming out of a what do you call it?
Bow.
Yes, like an arrow coming out of a bow. It needs a destination. It's always aiming itself. And then the 12th house is devoid of these destinations. It becomes aimless. It becomes drained of its energy. The Sun is a mild malefic, technically should do well in a Dushthana house, like the way we talked about it in the 6th and the 8th. But we saw a Sun that pretty good, fairly well in the 6th, a little less so in the 8th, and now it's not doing so well in the 12th. Again, the Sun doesn't necessarily need a reference point, but for the Sun, for the self to have a sense of self, it needs the relational dynamic of other people. And the Sun wants to be in a position of authority as the center, as the leader, as the boss. And there's nothing to boss around in the 12th house. There's no one again to lead. It's again devoid of destinations. Everything is a merged state. So there has to be a dissolution or an ending to this notion of the self and its identity, because technically, if you think about it, consciousness in itself is kind of like the 12th house in a sense that it's describing the connectivity of everything as one. Like the ultimate being in the Vedic tradition is described as a kind of a consciousness. It is consciousness. And we, the Atma, the individuated souls, are a branch of its consciousness. So when you put our sense of self into the 12th house, we only have a sense of self and an identity because we are differentiating ourselves from other people. I come to understand throughout a lifetime, I am me and I have a sense of myself because I'm not Jay. This is a part of the process of having an identity, ego, and a sense of self. Now you go to the 12th house where there is no differentiation. This is why Mercury also suffers, because Mercury needs to be like, this is this is that, this is not that because this is this. It goes in the 12th house and there is no this and that. And Mercury is like, what? Nothing makes sense. This is so weird. Where am I? And the sun the same. Who am I? Like I am you, but I'm not you, but I'm me. It comes up with these weird conundrums. You can find people who don't have a strong sense of self when the sun goes into the 12th, in the sense that they don't have their own identity. Their identity will fluctuate. If they're with this person, their sense of identity becomes like that person. So it's the 12th house is challenging that stability, that center of being that the self needs, because your identity is orbiting around it, your ego is orbiting around it. And then if you don't have any of these concepts stable, and the sun represents stability, if it's becoming unstable, then if you don't have a strong, that's why I'm saying this house can create narcissists, for example, because you don't have a strong self-concept. You actually lack self-confidence. You lack that decisive quality that both Sun and Mars have as masculine principles, because of the way they're being diffused and scattered all over the place, rather than Mars wants to concentrate, create a focal point and move forward. The sun wants to create this concentration and this gravity of mass in the middle where its weight is now pulling everything around it. And the 12th house is just diffusing all of this. So they're losing that inherent power that's inside of them. So it struggles. The self struggles to keep a unity and a unified sense of identity and self. So it's constantly becoming disintegrated. This is very draining. Like people who have to grapple with the question of who am I? Oh, it is draining. Constantly looking to others to get a sense of self, needing extra determination and motivation. People who watch motivational stuff or obsessed with it, they probably have something going on in the 12th house, because you're trying to externally get yourself energized because this house is draining it and there's no center.
Yeah.
Like I was saying, on the upside of this house, which is probably one of the most difficult things for a human being to attain. And then there's that concept of Mokṣa, which in this same tradition, it doesn't necessarily come in this lifetime. You might have to live 1,000,000 lifetimes before you get to Mokṣa, which is that sense of spirituality, to understand that Atma, that individuated soul, is actually the soul and the conscious that is existence itself. And what that means is to renunciate the self. So this is kind of like the antithesis of how we're conditioned to feel our own sun self, which is to have this very distinct sense of self and with the ego identity connected to it. The 12th house saying renunciate that. You are none of that. There's nothing here to support that. There's nothing here to give you confirmation and validation of it. And this is a very difficult thing to do, because if I'm not a father, if I am not a boss, if I am not a sister, a daughter. These are all identities. If I'm not rich, if I'm not an athlete, if I'm not, like as a human being, it's so hard to grasp. Because when you ask someone, like, who are you? One of the first things they'll say is what they do. It's like, really? That's who you are? It's very difficult to be in the 12th house because it's asking the sun to do that, to be a nobody, to be everything. And we human beings resist that. We end our own life when we don't have a sense of self. It causes depression and mental illness and mental health problems. So it's difficult.
Okay, so it could cause depression and all that because you don't have a sense of identity.
It could, right? It creates so much distortion about the self. I mean, at the end of the day, when you think about it, the mind is experiencing, and then there's this element of one's self that is constantly trying to solve the problems for the self, and then there's no self. You don't know what the solutions are. That's what I'm saying. People will spend so much money and so much of their time, like they'll be on YouTube for hours upon hours of their days, spending that time, which is actually draining the most valuable thing that they have, which is time and their energy, and they're remaining in that fantasy state of watching a screen to get a sense of motivation. They'll spend their time playing video games, and these are the things that the 12th house does. And the sun, one of the significations of the father that we can look at in the 12th house, like we love to see like that. I was talking about that subconscious aspect that gets wired into us, that is our parental ways of being and their socialization that's embedded in us, and we don't understand how it's working, but it's part of the software in the background working. But the father too, I mean, some people are out to lunch or out of touch with reality. Like that's the nature of one's father, for example. Or the father is enlightened, and it's talking about that spiritual aspect of it. But we have to look at the rest of the configuration of the chart of how this is connecting to the father, and then who the father is, who his sense of self is, and how it's informing the native's identity and sense of self. This is part of the narrative of the sun in the 12th house. But I think one of the most important things to look at when you look at a birth chart with the sun in the 12th house, where is the sun of Leo? Because that's the lord of that other house that's gone to the 12th house. And then where is the lord of the 12th house? That's a very important thing too. Like, where has it gone? Is it supporting this 12th house? What's aspecting the 12th? What other planets are sitting there? Do you have things in the 6th house? Maybe it's balancing things out a little bit. So yeah, you have to look at the entire dynamic of the chart.
So don't completely freak out yet.
Don't completely freak out. No, I think you know what? Whether you have something in your 12th house or not, that's what I was trying to say at the beginning. I have not met anyone who defines their life, especially once when you get past that 20s decade, as having been easy. Even when you're in your 20s and going through it, you've already perhaps experienced some breakups, or you've experienced the hardship of love's lost and the pain and the hurt that comes from that. You may have experienced a bunch of family conflict, loss of friends, moving. It's so many difficulties even before that, but there's a sense of blind optimism still throughout that decade, where one doesn't want to admit that because they feel like that would be defeat. But I think from 30s forward, I have not met any human being who sits there and says, my life was easy peasy. Everyone, whether you have things in the 12th house or not, life is difficult. The 12th house is saying which part of it is very pronounced in terms of its difficulty. I don't know, a lot of people want to be kings and queens. They don't understand what kind of hardships comes with that, what kind of restriction and limitation comes with that. I'm saying every life that someone imagines that it's a good life will have a difficult component, and the 12th house is just one component of life that is difficult based on the significations that he's talking about, which is relinquishing the physical aspects of the world. And when the sun goes there, relinquishing that need for a self that will come at any cost, at any expense, where it can be betraying, sabotaging, narcissistic, overcompensating, because the 12th house is keep taking and the person needs to have a sense of self. You just have to give these things up, and it's just not easy because it's talking about yourself. It's not like giving up a chair, you know?
Yeah.
So it makes it difficult to get to the core of your soul and your consciousness. Yeah. And it's a moksha house. The 12th house is the last set of the moksha houses because we had 4, 8, and 12. And I was saying they're kind of like a graduation and a progression. First, you need to get knowledge about yourself in the 4th house, become enlightened about that. And when you do, then you understand what your internal configuration are. And then you can graduate to the mysteries of the world, all of its uncertainty and the craziness that's there. That's the 8th house. The 12th house, you're trying to understand the nature of existence and God. And one way to get enlightened and to achieve moksha in the 12th house is through devotion. And that is to understand that there's some higher force, being, energy, God, whatever one wants to call it, where this material and the self concepts has to some degree be annihilated to have that merging through that devotion. So that's the graduation point, the 12th house. And another thing too, oh, I hear this so often. So I have planets in the 12th house. That means I'm going to have moksha. I don't know. Are you enlightened? That's not what the 12th house, that is an aim. That is a goal of life. It's not called a destination of life. They're called the 4 goals of life. And there's such thing as karma and reincarnation, because we're going to learn some things. We're going to become enlightened about some things. As we become enlightened, our suffering in that area of life ends. And then maybe later in life or in the preceding lives, this is not what you have to grapple with anymore. But that whole thing of like, I'm definitely going to get moksha and be liberated. I don't know.
Not that definite statement that I have planets there means moksha, but if that's in there,
it's a lot of
you have to look at a lot of things to see that, I'm guessing.
Yeah, you're a yogi and you're a sage, you're a saint, you're a complete renunciate. Okay, fine, that is the aim of your life and you're really working with it. But most of us, we're still chasing things, we're still doing like maybe this notion of moksha and that aspect of your chart means that your soul is here in this lifetime to become enlightened about this topic. Like for some of us, it takes a lifetime to get love straight. For some of us, it takes a lifetime to get forgiveness of certain people and individuals right. For other people, is their career. Like it literally takes a lifetime to get one component of life right. So maybe someone who has sun in the 12th house, the entirety of this life is being spent towards the aim of letting go of superfluous, useless, devastating notions of the self. And when you're enlightened about how to do that and how that is done, because you know now, knowing is being enlightened, and you embody that knowledge and that embodiment becomes a part of you, you are liberated. You don't have to grapple with that anymore. Now you are in a higher state of being and a higher state of consciousness. So maybe that's what it's indicating, because that's one way that the 12th house is often sugar-coated. I'm going to get moksha. This is what this lifetime's about. Don't even put that pressure on yourself, I'm trying to say. Just become enlightened about that area of life. If that planet has certain significations, try to understand what you're grappling with in regards to that. Because a lot of, especially with the sun in the 12th, some of the feelings that are associated to it is guilt and shame, right?
With the sun or just with the
Yes.
12th house? Okay.
With the sun.
Because your self-respect, your self-worth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So a lot of your life experiences come to be about shame and guilt. So let's say you think you're supposed to have moksha, but you slip somewhere because you have the sun there. You're trying to figure out something very complex about this notion of selfhood, soul, consciousness, God. Now you're gonna have to spend the next 10 years of your life dealing with this shame and guilt. That's why I'm saying it's when people do that, when they're trying to sugarcoat things, they don't understand that they're making the matter a lot more complex and strange for themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's just say the liberation of the sun in the 12th house is to be liberated from yourself.
Okay.
Yeah, just to make it simple. And then whoever that's listening, they can contemplate what that means for them or what that just generally means.
Well, like you said, you also have to analyze where, like, Leo or like if it's what's sitting in
What
like, don't you have to look
house
at
then?
yeah.
Yeah,
So it's
it's
not
Leo in the
just
first
so
house, second house, third house, fourth
yeah.
house. Yeah.
Yeah, you're just giving a raw, like you said, raw interpretation if it's just sun sitting in the 12th by itself.
Yes. But on the upside, the spirit that is existence itself, God itself, is in itself consciousness. And the sun represents consciousness. So we're talking about potentiality of understanding that. That's a resonance. But when we think about all the other significations of the sun, even light, there's a dissonance in the 12th house.
Yeah.
Yeah. Soul and consciousness, yes, there's resonance. But once when the problems of this house regarding to the self are resolved. That's all I can think of right now. That's all I got for the moment.
That's quite a bit.
Was that what time is it? Wow.
We didn't even talk about our own lives, nothing.
I thought this house was going to be a little bit longer. Yeah, when I was thinking about it today, I'm like, nope, I cannot add to that noise of like, don't worry about it. You're super creative and you're just so empathetic because and then you have like global consciousness. I was like, no, I can't do that. All right. So in general, do we need to say anything about sun through the houses? Because we're done.
I know. Sun through the houses on Saturn's day.
On sacrilegious. Didn't we start on Saturn's Day?
Yeah, possibly.
I think, and you know what? How appropriate actually, because Saturn prolongs things. And this was one of the most prolonged series we've done. Well, the
Yeah.
nakshatras are going to be probably the longest by the time the end comes, but from the planets, this was the longest so far, thanks to Saturn, the son of the sun.
Oh, yeah,
Shani.
literally.
Yeah, Shani and Surya. All right, I think that's it, right?
Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna wrap up the sun through the houses. We did it. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
That's it.
Wow.
No, much love. Till next time.